Okay, so Rob is asking, why are Malaysian Muslims more conservative or regressive in their views than Indonesian Muslims? Well, okay, I don't know. We should say some Malaysian Muslims, relative or like the average. I don't know how true this claim is, but I don't want us to generalize all Muslims in Malaysia or Indonesia together. But let's not be too picky. It goes and so it continues and says, for example, Malaysian Muslims are much more supportive of having a death penalty for apostasy than Indonesian Muslims. This seems odd to me, given that both countries are in the same region of the world. They both follow the same school of Islam, the Shafi'i, and Malaysia has more religious diversity than Indonesia. Okay, so if you want to see, so in the past couple of decades, things have changed so dramatically in attitudes and views in the Islamic world. Like you have seen a surge of radicalism. So it doesn't make sense for us to just look at geography and long history. Like, for example, you're mentioning the one of the four Sunni schools of thought that is more common there in Malaysia, but and in Indonesia. But that's like a longer history that has affected the views over like much older. You have to go a lot big back in the past. Like this is like so old history. Like you have to look at what recently has changed in the world of Islam, a little bit more recent. Like even in the past just 50 years, views and attitudes have changed so dramatically. Like for example, if you look at Pakistan, for example, right? 50 years Pakistan, the views of Muslims and the attitudes and the amount of radicalism was so significantly different than to Pakistan today. Or if you look at Iran, for example, or if you look at Saudi Arabia, right? So given how dramatically things have changed in the past 50 years, you can't look at factors, you can't just isolate factors like geography, because Pakistan's geography hasn't changed. For example, Pakistan or Iran's geography hasn't changed in the past 50 years, right? The predominant school of thought in Pakistan or Iran hasn't changed in the past 50 years, but yet its attitudes and radicalism has changed dramatically in the past 50 years in these two countries. So there are other factors that have major roles, right? So what other major roles have an impact on Malaysian attitudes, in Muslims in Malaysia, right? For example, so we say like geography is one of them. They're the same area. Being Shafi'i school of thought is one factor. So what are some other alternative factors, right? So let's look at, like for example, what was Iran? It had an Islamic revolution, right? What was Pakistan? Pakistan had Saudi Arabia in competition with the Iran's exporting of its brand of Shia Islam across the Middle East and more. Saudi Arabia decided to invest in madrasas around the world, including in Pakistan, which you see a dramatic rise of number of madrasas in Pakistan funded by Saudi Arabia, had a huge impact. Like this, one of those factors that had a huge impact over Pakistan, which grew religious fundamentalism in Pakistan and in Afghanistan. Afghanistan was also impacted by Egypt, by the way, right? So that's geography was the same, but that was a major change in Pakistan. By the way, that's probably the same thing that is changing Malaysia. But let's look at some evidence for this and see. Well, but I don't know if this is evidence. Just look at some suggestions of what it could potentially be. Let's look at this together. Oh, so I have to remove the question so we don't block this. It says Wahhabism spreading among Malaysians elite. This is an article in 2017. It says, I don't know what this word is, but a religious official has alleged that Wahhabism is gaining a foothold within the elite of Malaysian society, right? So, like, one suggestion is that the same thing that affected Pakistan, which was the investment and the export of Wahhabist ideology from Saudi Arabia to Pakistan, what cursed Pakistan is exactly the same thing. Could be one of the major factors that is including Malaysia as well, right? And again, Malaysia itself is Shafi'i, but Wahhabism is rooted in Hanbali, right? So these are competing schools of thought within Malaysia. You know, one of them is being exported from somewhere like Saudi Arabia to Malaysia, right? And again, I'm not saying by Saudi Arabia, I'm not talking about the government itself. Like, it used to be the government itself. Right now, the government itself is fighting this in Saudi Arabia, but there are still private, and there's still a lot of big money behind exporting ideas like this. By the way, it might be a lot less right now because Saudi Arabia's government right now is cracking down on stuff like that. But this already had an impact. Like, this is 2017. Over the past, 40 or 20 years, the export of these ideas have had a major impact on countries like not just Malaysia, Indonesia as well. So maybe I don't know if it has impacted Malaysia more, but it might have. So this might explain. I'm not saying this explains it. I'm saying this might explain what you're asking here, right? So saying this guy, Muhfuz Muhammad, a committee member of the something Islamic School Religious Council, told FMT that areas in something Valley that were considered elite had become nests for the spread of Wahhabism, a school of thought that the Saudi royal family subscribes to and is often linked to the Islamic State terror organization. So you could search for this article and read the entire thing, but there was another article that I also found that was suggesting the same thing, but that was behind a paywall. But luckily, somebody had just copied paste the entire article on Facebook. So this was here's another article. It's saying the radicalization of Islam in Malaysia. This is someone else is saying Dr. Ahmad Fauz Abdul Hamid is ringing the alarm bell. Having studied political Islam for years, he says it is time to alert the authorities that Muslims here are surely but slowly becoming radicalized. Before the situation deteriorates further to what we see in Afghanistan and Pakistan, it is better that we take the necessary precautions and do whatever we need to do, whether it's to revamp of the school curriculum to correct the situation, he says. Oh, another thing you could look up is the fact that a lot of these Wahhabist ideology are like leaking into the school system, right? Like, I don't know if it mentions it here or not. And here, actually, look at this. And over the span of 30 years or so, he says the students who grew up, imbibing, I don't know that word, the Wahhabi Salafist-oriented curriculum in schools. Okay, so look at this. The Salafist or Wahhabi-oriented curriculum is affecting the school system in Malaysia. So this might explain a whole bunch of these attitudes are now in the workforce. So this has been happening in the past 30 years. Okay. And now those children have grown up and now they're in the workforce. And now Malaysia is seeing the effect of those kids entering, becoming adults and now changing how Malaysia does business. And some are in the civil services, some have become influential bureaucrats, scholar, academics, lawyers. So this is basically seeing the result of all that education investment by Saudi Arabia into exporting Wahhabism into Malaysia. So I think this might explain it. Again, none of this is for certain, but that's where I would go. If you're more interested in this, that's where I would go do my research to see if that explains it. Let me know on Patreon if that was helpful. If you'd like to send me your questions for me to answer during our Q&As, become a patron. If you would like to have a discussion with me live on air at the end of the Q&As, become a YouTube member. Link to both is in the description. Thank you for your support.